Now that we're back, what we want to do is we have jQuery downloaded. We want to look at the replacement for window.onload that is part of normal JavaScript, but has some disadvantages. It waits till everything is loaded. It waits till all the images have loaded and all the fonts, if you've loaded fonts, everything is all ready to go before it lets you run your code. jQuery, on the other hand, is pretty darn smart. It has a function, this document.ready function, that just waits for the DOM to be ready. It doesn't wait for all the images to load and everything to be perfect. It just waits for the DOM to load, the logic of your page, and then it will run and attach scripts and run functions at that point, which is really nice. It doesn't wait on anything. It gets going as fast as possible. We're going to go through this crazy looking $ document.ready function here in a little bit, but quick introduction. Dollar is short for a library. Usually in our case it's jQuery. If you have more than one library that you're using, say you're using MooTools and jQuery, you'd have to spell out jQuery, type it all out. But the $ is a nice shortcut for jQuery. Document.ready does exactly what it says. It waits for the document to be ready and it runs that function. Notice it's an anonymous function, which an anonymous function is just a function with no name. Now, like I said, we're used to the window.onload function and then doing our stuff, whatever we're trying to accomplish on our page, but it is inefficient, and jQuery has something that's a little bit better, this document.ready function. You have to link to the jQuery file first, and I think last time I checked it was somewhere around 40K or so. It's not bad as far as download goes. And the cool thing is, if you use a CDN or a content delivery network like Google, more than likely people have already downloaded jQuery to their hard drives, to their computers, or to their device, and they don't have to download it again because you're pulling it from the same place. It's cached in their browser, and it just happens instantaneously. So here I think, good rule of thumb is put your JavaScript programming after any of the content inside the head tag, but before the closing head tag. That way all your CSS style sheets have loaded. It's very good practice to do that. And right now you see the document.ready function where we can use. Now jQuery provides a shortcut because you do this all the time. A shortcut for a shortcut kind of thing. So instead of typing out $document.ready anonymous function, there's a shortcut that just throws an anonymous function out there. Now notice the punctuation is a little gnarly, just to be honest with you. But if you type it out in sequence and make sure you pair all your punctuation, you'll be just fine. Because if you notice there, we have a $, and then we have, if you kind of watch it, you've got the open and close parentheses and then the semicolon. Inside the open and close parentheses, you've got the anonymous function. And this situation comes up an awful lot. So kind of get used to it if you can, that this to match your parentheses and your curly braces in this kind of structure. And all we've got here is a shortcut. If you want to use document.ready function, that's awesome. There's no reason not to. Just a little bit more typing, but it accomplishes exactly the same thing. Now jQuery as a library does all sorts of cool things. If you notice on Google Maps, when you scroll around, it happens instantaneously. It doesn't have to reload the page, and that kind of thing is what we're good at. Another example is here's this pop-up that's done by Netflix. A lot of times these kind of things are done so commonly that they're in a library like jQuery. So pop-ups, scrolling around without having to reload the page, all those sort of things. Just even something as simple as a date picker, which is built into a library like jQuery saves you an awful lot of time and an awful lot of effort in giving you commonly used elements. Now here's how all this works. You will select an element on a page, then you do something to that element. And that is all there is to it. You might change a property of an element, you might add new content, you might remove an element, you might animate it, extract information from it, do all sorts of things, add or remove a class attribute, etc., etc. It all works the same way. You select an element on a page and then you do something to the element. Now, the nice thing is we've already been talking about the DOM. It all works with the DOM because the DOM is JavaScript's way of thinking about a web page. Sort of like HTML thinks of a web page as structured with tags and elements, CSS is dependent on those as well as JavaScript, but JavaScript thinks of it as the DOM. Now we have this nice simple page. It's HTML5. You can tell that by the doc type. An HTML tag, head, and a body with a H1 and a paragraph. We look at this kind of in a tree structure, and you've got things that we're used to talking about. We've got parents and children. We've got siblings. The head of your document is a sibling of the body. The body has two children, H1 and the paragraph. The paragraph has some attributes and some text nodes. Remember, text is nodes, attributes are nodes. White space in some browsers is considered a node. So when you use plain old JavaScript, you say document.getElement by ID, or document.getElements by tag name, or document.getElements by class name. Lots and lots of typing. If you want to dig down and find an element, a specific element, it can be hard because you have to do your own set of looping. You might have to search for, say, all the anchor tags on a page first, and then have to go through and loop through each anchor tag and see which ones have classes attached to them and pick out the class that you want and then work on it. It's kind of labor intensive. jQuery makes it so much easier. Another issue you run across frequently is the DOM was implemented in one browser, especially Internet Explorer, in a way different than all the others. And it ended up meaning you had to do your program twice almost. You would do it for all the standards compliant browsers, and then you had to come back and make it work in IE. Now, IE 9 and especially 10 have gotten so much better at this, following standards compliance. Unfortunately, not everybody has caught up. jQuery does all that work for you, but in the background, and you don't have to worry about, does this work with IE? Does this work with Opera? Does this work with Firefox? What about Chrome and Safari? Just works. Now, jQuery selectors, or what's behind door number 2. Now remember, jQuery syntax is just tailor-made for selecting HTML elements and then performing some action. You select something, then you do something to it. In jQuery parlance, it's a selector of some type that is generally just like CSS. That's one of the wonderful things about jQuery. It's basically you're using the CSS you already know to make your selection, and then with dot syntax you add an action onto the end, or a method, or a function, depending on what term you want to use. The $sign effectively defines jQuery. The selector or the query to find an HTML element is usually defined in CSS, and then some sort of action to be performed. Very, very straightforward, I believe. Now, selectors, it's just CSS syntax. Notice these selectors are in quote marks. They can use single quotes or double quotes. Usually doesn't matter a bit. I try and save my double quotes for when I need them for something specific, but it really doesn't make a big difference. Now, if you have some HTML nice paragraph, ID of copyright. In the DOM, you'd say document.getElement by ID, and then parentheses, in quotes, copyright. Not too bad, but jQuery just makes it so much easier because you're working in a language with CSS you already know, and just say, hey, pound or hash mark copyright. And that's all you need to do to select that element with that ID. Now, we're going to take a field trip and look at a selectors file that came with that secondary textbook. It's a free download with it, and we'll come back after we take a peek at. Now, if you look at the website for the supplementary text, it's, let's see here, it's on page 16 of the Missing Manual, jQuery and JavaScript. You can go to this website, which is missingmanuals.com/cds, and download the files that go along with it. There we go, right there. But for now, I've already downloaded it, and you can just watch as I show you this little jQuery selector test. What is going to happen is we're going to make some selections. It'll show you up here the jQuery code that produced it, the selector, and the elements that it found. Say, for instance, you want to find all the paragraphs. Here's the P for paragraph. If I click it, it is highlighting all the paragraphs on this page in red. It's showing you up here the code that produced it, $, open and close parentheses, open and close quote marks, P for paragraph. It's the CSS element selector. How many elements it found, and the selector up there. This is really pretty cool. I'll hit reset, and for instance, I want to find the body tag. Highlights everything. Our jQuery is $, parentheses, quotes, body. Pretty straightforward stuff. You may want to play around with this and see what all these different kinds of selectors do. I'm going to explain most of them in a little bit. But here, for instance, there's a paragraph, but I only want the first paragraph. So there's the first paragraph in this page. Up there, there's the jQuery selector, there's the code, and it only found one element. Have some fun with this. You can learn a lot from it as far as how to select things. I'll see you back at the PowerPoint.